Hey, everybody. Welcome to Liberty Lens. I'm your host, Big John. Today on Liberty Lens, we're going to close out 2025 by doing two things. First, we're going to dig into the Russia-Ukraine war and the so-called peace talks, which are now dominating the headlines. Talks that are supposedly 90% done, even as missiles, drones, and civilian attack accusations are flying into the new year. Then, perhaps at the end of that, if we have some time, we're going to step back and take stock of 2025 itself, with perhaps looking back at some of the top stories. And we're going to ask Mike Termott to maybe make a bold prediction or two for 2026. Because if there's one lesson of this moment, it's this. Peace isn't something you just get to declare. It's something you have to work to achieve. All right, everyone. I'm Big John. Happy New Year. And welcome, of course, to my co-host, Mr. Mike Termott of the Republican Liberty Caucus, former Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee. Mike, how are you doing heading into 2026?
I'm doing terrific. I'm on the road, as you can tell by my background. It's great to be with you. I hope that 2026 is a terrific year for you, John, and for your family.
Thank you.
I'm in Chicago at the moment, where it's freezing, celebrating my mother's 90th birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday to Mama Termott.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And she says back at you, not to imply that you're 90. And I'm doing the podcast from my sister's bedroom. I've got the accoutrement to go with it. I've got my Lillian Pulitzer cup here.
Nice.
So I am totally at my sister's place and feeling very anti-war. So let's do this.
Very good. All right. And I'll apologize a little bit for my voice before we start. I'm coming off a recent bout with COVID, so apologies for that. You don't get the dulcet Big John tones you may be accustomed to. All right, Mike, let's start off with this. In the news everywhere, we've heard that, and President Trump has announced this, that, he's taking credit for a potential Russia-Ukraine peace deal. The one that he promised us within 48 hours of his inauguration, he's claiming we're here. We're 90% done. Mike, there's a 20-point plan that goes along with this. Why don't we just kind of set the table here? What's your sort of take on the peace plan that the president has relayed to the press and to the rest of his fellow Americans for Russia and Ukraine?
I commend the White House for coming up with the plan and for President Trump to back it. I know a lot of folks have made a lot of hay over the fact that he had said this would be relatively easy, and now the White House looks slightly dopey for realizing after the fact that this is both hard and arguably not in what Vladimir Putin would perceive to be Russia's interest. And so this is not only dragged on for a year, but is very likely to drag on for some time in the future and result in a ceasefire that is, I don't mean to sound overly pessimistic, but unlikely to be permanent. So, we have criticized President Trump for all kinds of things. We give credit where credit is due. And I got to say, I come down on this side with President Trump and his 20-point plan. I come down on the side of at least he's trying. You know what I mean? If he's trying to get us out of Ukraine, get us out without dedicating another 100 or $200 billion of resources and dragging this on for another 100,000 deaths, if he's trying to bring it to a close, I'll give him a pass on looking slightly dopey for having said that this was going to be easy. I think we all knew it wasn't going to be easy. So right. His suggestion that it was, I just chalk up to he was wrong.
Right. And I mean, even given the president's tendency towards exaggeration and everything, you're right. We all knew it wasn't getting done in 2 days and all that fun stuff. In the 20-point plan, I think most of the stuff in there is fairly non-controversial, except for a few things. And this is where you have to take that 90% completion sort of talk with a grain of salt, because it's the 10% that's, the real sticking points. We can all agree we don't want to.
It's all that matters. It's all you're negotiating over, right?
Exactly.
You throw the 20-point plan on the board, and maybe 15 points everyone can agree on in the first couple of hours.
Right.
And then the others you may never agree on.
Right. So you're absolutely right. And it's that sticking point. So it's a little, I think, misleading because when you say it's 90% done, you kind of put the impression out there, oh, give it another week. As soon as the holidays are over, we're just going to get back to the table and it's a done deal, which is definitely not the case.
Right.
2 or 3 things that I picked out. Give me your thoughts on that I think are going to be real sticking points. Let's start off with something relatively simple. The nuclear power plant. I'm not even going to give a shot at the name of it. It's ZNPP or the initials of it. One of the things that I think the U.S. would like to see is that this doesn't necessarily fall under Putin's control. We're even okay with an international sort of ownership, oversight of it. Talk to me about the importance of the nuclear power plant, ZNPP.
It's critical for a couple of different reasons. One is there's a huge psychological factor. This is probably not the most important, but let me mention it real quick. There's a psychological element to this, right? Because the power plant played such a large role in providing power to that part of Ukraine, not having it under your own control anymore. By the way, this was never in the private sector. This was public sector controlled by the national government of Ukraine. By not having it under your control, there is a feeling of having ceded an important piece of sovereignty when giving it up. The Trump administration is suggesting that there might be some shared administration of it. I suspect it's going to be one of those things that the Kremlin eventually not caves, but it's not the most centrally important thing to Moscow. So it would not shock me if it were to compromise at some point and accept the idea of it being mutually controlled. And remember that Moscow is playing a very long game. To the extent to which Putin thinks he's eventually going to start up this war again in the future, if he does come to a ceasefire now, if he does compromise and suggest that the nuclear power plant ought to be mutually controlled, he's eventually going to get his way and control the whole damn thing anyway. So I wouldn't be shocked if he were to compromise on this.
Right. And I think it's important that you mentioned sort of like the first minor step when you talk about the sovereignty of Ukraine with respect to Russia, that even if it's psychological, they want to have control of it. Talk to me now about actual territory, because that's the next major sticking point, right? That Russia is sort of like, hey, we want the Donbas region. We want what we want in terms of territory. Whereas Ukraine is saying, hey, let's kind of like freeze the lines where they are. We still will have to maintain, and this is going to be a sticking point, as it is at the end of every war, right? Like, where are the lines drawn? Just like it was in Vietnam and Korea. Talk to me about that.
This is something that I don't think the Russians are likely to compromise on. They want all of the 4 oblasts. Oblasts are the subunits of the national territory, the national government. Think of them as analogous to the 50 states, right? In the United States, for example, or provinces. There are 4 oblasts, of which Russia now controls part, but not all. Because Putin controls parts of these 4, he has now a land bridge to the Crimea, which is absolutely critical. But the Russians do, Russia proper, previous to this war, did reach down to the Crimea, but to access Crimea required going over a bridge over the waterway at the Black Sea. And the Russians do not consider that to be an acceptable way to connect Crimea to Russia proper. And so they feel that they need a land bridge through these 4 oblasts, which they have achieved, technically speaking. But in some areas, this land bridge is only a couple of dozen miles wide. And the Kremlin does not consider this to be anywhere near sufficient. Just like the bridge over the water connection, the Ukrainians have been able to bomb, missile, explode, disrupt the Russians believe that the Ukrainians will always be able to attack this land bridge if it's only in some places 20 or 30 miles wide. So the Russians consider the conquest of the rest of these four oblasts to be a critical mission of this war. They believe that they absolutely have to take over these four oblasts, the Donbass and Kherson in particular, and then farther south. They believe that they need to take over quite a bit more territory. They are unlikely to agree to the existing line, the existing battlefield drawn line.
And what do we do when it comes to that? See, this is that part of that 10% that's still unresolved, right? Where you kind of say, oh, well, this is a sticking point.
Yeah.
Because can we see Zelensky, can we see Ukraine saying, you know, at this stage, it's very hard to see them saying, go ahead and take over that territory. You know, like what's...
Particularly because, to your point, Zelensky has said, and about which he is correct, that legally, as far as his domestic policy goes, legally, he needs a national referendum. He believes that he can compromise and his legislature can sign off on ceding land to the Russians. Having said that, that referendum or that legislative maneuver is not going to go well, even if you were to have a ceasefire based on the existing battlefield line. To now suggest that you've got to give up more territory than that, and all of the four oblasts, of which parts of which the Russians control, that is really unlikely to foster a vote that's going to go in favor of ceding all of those four oblasts to the Russians. Right. So I think we've got a pickle here, in that even if Putin were to agree to a ceasefire and get all the territory he wants, even if Trump said, yeah, that's okay, that's a good idea, and put pressure on everyone to sign off on it, even if Zelensky eventually could be convinced that was a good idea, there's no way the Ukrainian people are going to sign off on a referendum to give up all those four oblasts or the legislature as their representatives. It just seems far-fetched. I don't mean anything in this world is impossible, right? Depending on the pressure that the Russians are able to bring to bear. It just seems, politically speaking, really unlikely. It's setting the bar too high, and anything below that is not setting the bar high enough for Putin.
Right, right. And again, this is part of that difficulty, right? Like, we want to see the killing end. We want to see the hostilities end. But at the end of the day, you know, if we put ourselves in the shoes of Ukraine, like, are we going to, if we were at war with Mexico, would we agree to giving up Texas and New Mexico as part of that agreement? I mean, it becomes very difficult to negotiate that away. All right.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa, right. Now, the second... one of the other major sticking points is the security guarantees. That if we do agree that, okay, if the war ends, there's a peace treaty, who's going to make sure that Putin doesn't decide, like you said, a year from now, to just say, okay, we kind of caught our breath, we've rebuilt our military industrial complex here, let's go finish the job. Obviously, Ukraine is going to want some security guarantees, especially if they're not going to be allowed to join NATO.
Yep.
So is this something where libertarians, their radar goes off and it's like, is the U.S. committing trillions of dollars, or are we committing potentially boots on the ground? Is this something where the UN has to commit boots on the ground? Where do you see these security guarantees headed?
We'll know more January 6th when the Europeans get together and discuss this. Heads of state, they will discuss this. They will presumably outline a plan and be able to give some signal by the end of that day. Certainly January 7th, they'll be able to give us some signal as to their willingness to commit resources or troops, or at least functionally speaking, what they're willing to commit to on a trigger, right? Will they be willing to commit troops as far as boots on the ground right away? As a tripwire, if Russia were to invade again, they would have to push their way through NATO forces. Or would the Europeans simply say, if this happens, then we will commit either resources or troops? These are important decisions the Europeans need to make. There has been a lot said, John, about there being a moral hazard of giving Putin what he wants here, right? If we give in and let Putin have what he wants, and either we sign an agreement with no teeth and he takes what he wants later, or we just allow him to keep going forward today, then we are inviting bad behavior in the future. Not only more bad behavior from Putin himself, but potentially from others. People look to China, for example, as someone who is watching closely how Putin gets treated. All of that moral hazard is true, and I don't want to minimize it. However, there's another element of moral hazard to which I think we have not paid sufficient attention, not just as libertarians, but as Americans in general, and as the rest of the Western world, to which we need to pay more attention. And that is this: if the United States is the government that steps in and makes this ceasefire last, if it's either our boots on the ground or our commitment based on some sort of tripwire, or if we're the ones providing the resources, or even if we're just the ones that are forcing everyone to come to the plate, to the extent to which we are the sole leader and that we are bearing the cost, either in terms of human lives or financial resources or equipment, or if we're the ones putting our prestige on the line, we are also creating another type of moral hazard in that we are making the world all too comfortable for the Europeans to continue to do too little. You see where I'm going.
Right.
And Donald Trump, to his credit, has been talking about this for a long time, that NATO may no longer be, as it's structured today, may no longer be in America's interest, because it has become accepted by the Europeans as a means by which they don't have to invest in their military defense as much as they ought to. So kudos to Trump for raising that issue, and kudos to the president for pressuring European governments to commit to 5% of their GDP this past year, to commit 5% of their GDP going forward to military defense. It's a huge first step toward a more rational shared responsibility. And I think that we will see January 6th, whether that has sunk in beyond just signing a piece of paper with, Trump taking your hand and putting a pen in it and forcing it to scroll across a piece of paper, or whether the Europeans really understand that they're going to have to step up and provide the security guarantee that Zelensky needs. And if they're not, right, if the Europeans are not willing to provide sufficient security guarantee, what does that mean? Because I think at this point, you've got to say that a lot of these nations have demonstrated what it is that they're not willing to do. And in, Putin's case, what he is willing to do. But I think the time has come, John, for the United States government to demonstrate what it's willing to not do.
Right.
And I mean that to sound slightly different from not willing to do, but willing to not do. In other words, what is it that we as a nation, what is it we should demand of our government to tolerate and leave undone? What is it that we should be willing to have not done? I feel badly for the Ukrainian people as a result of this whole episode. Nothing good can come of this, right?
Right.
I think it's everyone's knee-jerk reaction to want to help the Ukrainians. We all get that. But if we continue to be the backstop against foreign aggression around the world, it's not just a matter of stopping a little aggression here and stopping it there and making sure tyrants don't go too far, but we're also sending the signal to the other powers that could be doing something.
Right.
That they don't need to. And that's the wrong signal in the long run. And it may well be as horrible as this may sound, it may well be that giving up part of Ukraine is a price the world is going to have to be willing to pay.
It is something that Americans have to consider for themselves, because there are a lot of parallels to be drawn, say, with Chamberlain and Hitler right before World War II, right? That famously, Chamberlain's approach of appeasement did nothing to stop Hitler. And if you sort of draw analogies, not in ideology, but in terms of the circumstance of Hitler to Putin and the U.S. to Chamberlain, the U.S. has long, for better or for worse, decided that it was going to spend a lot of its productivity being the world's policeman. You know, it's very interesting that when you look at the United States, we made a choice a long time ago to take our productivity, our GDP, and spend most of it, if not all of it, on military, right? Our military still is the equivalent of the next 8 or 9 militaries. If you added them up, we'd still be ahead of them. What we spend on our military,
absolutely. Right? And there is an argument that suggests that if we were stuck in a war with the rest of the world, we could probably win it.
Probably, yeah. So the question now becomes,
which might mean, to your point, that might mean you're setting the bar too high.
Yeah. So then the question is that if the U.S. continues to spend all this on its military, there's no reason to, unless you're going to be the world's cop. And I know I'm drawing out a complicated sort of web of logic here, but if you're not going to play the role of the world's policeman, and I'm not arguing pro or con, but if you're not, as a national policy, that means you need to start dismantling your military industrial complex, because then you're just wasting money on nothing. We don't need the budget we have to defend our homeland. So rather than defend everybody else, what are we pointing that in towards? Are we willing to make those structural changes, Mike? Because otherwise, then you're stuck in the position of saying, well, are we going to play the role of Chamberlain here until it's too late? And Putin, now we're facing a Xi-Putin alliance for World War III.
It is an important... Yeah, it is.
I know what I said is complicated and perhaps
but you're spot on. It is an important consideration, and let me just throw out there a couple of other things to think about. One is the financial pinch that we're in. The federal government of the United States is in a financial pinch such that if we don't make a course correction, we will not be able to meet our debt obligations at some point over the next couple of decades. And at that point, we will precipitate a worldwide depression that robs everyone in the West of even having an option as to dedicating sufficient military resources to stopping tyrants like Putin or others.
By the way, Mike, I don't mean to interrupt you, but another parallel to pre-World War II. The U.S. basically exported a worldwide depression, right? And left a lot of other nations in positions where they couldn't defend themselves.
And it was a mess.
Yeah.
And it was because Hitler had such control over that nation's economy that without being burdened by market forces, and to a certain extent, having learned how to circumvent a lot of democratic forces, right? Because there was a lot of cult of personality going on there. Let's be candid. He was able to dedicate an enormous proportion of GDP to military power.
Right.
Today, if the United States is dedicating 3 or 4%, and the Europeans are committed to stepping up from 2% to 5%, call it 4%, because the 5% includes a lot of stuff that you wouldn't probably include on a clean accounting. But it's this order of magnitude, right, for the West. The Russians are dedicating well over 9% of GDP to their military today. And there are those who say that this is not good for them, of course. And so there is an argument to be made to just trying to wait them out, a la Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
Right?
I was just about to say that. Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. And Gorbachev, that was Reagan's strategy, was to just outstrip their ability to spend. Put the fear of the Lord in their heart until they spend so much money, their economy collapses. That worked.
Right.
We could continue to pursue that. There are those who say that the Russians are willing to go 10, 11, 12, 13% of GDP dedicated to the military. I query whether that's true and whether Putin could, politically speaking, survive that type of strategy over the next decade. I would hate to find out the hard way, though, right? To your point,
Right.
we would hate to find out the hard way. So I think there is a timing element here. You want the White House to do what it's doing now, which is to signal to the Europeans they need to step up now.
Right.
So that when the Russians could become aggressive in a way that goes past Ukraine, the resources are there to stop them. The good news is that we learned that there is no, German-style blitzkrieg tactic available to the Russians where they just overrun Ukraine in a matter of weeks, right? That's where the World War II analogy, as all analogies eventually do, where it breaks down.
Right.
That the Ukrainians have been able to put up a hell of a fight with European resources and American resources, no question about it. There wasn't full appeasement just because there haven't been European and American boots on the ground. And that has proven to the world not only that the Russians can't just march from one country to the next, at least not easily, not in a matter of a small number of years, but it also demonstrates that the Russian army was not what a lot of folks feared that it might have been. It just wasn't. When you look at how slowly the Russian army has been able to make progress, if we were to continue on the path that we're on now, the United States continues to provide some resources, to sell resources, the Europeans are providing resources, and the Ukrainians continue to fight. The Russians continue to fight, getting arms internally and from North Korea, from Iran, and continue doing business with China, which is providing a lot of foreign currency. This is how the war has gone so far. If the war was to continue on in that fashion, it would be years, not months, for Russia to overrun the totality, for Russia to overrun the totality of Ukraine. That's an important thing for us to keep in mind, because that's very different from World War II, right? When the Germans overran the Maginot Line, we all learned that that was illusory. And we learned that what we thought was the world's greatest defense in France wasn't, and was ill prepared. And the Germans were very good at turning local resources into resources that the German army could put to use. And therefore, nation hopping was a strategy that worked for them.
Right.
I don't think that that is analogous to where the Russians are today.
So right now, we're saying that the analogy to everyone who's comparing this to pre-World War II, yes, there are some similarities, but that perhaps 2026 Russia is not the equivalent of 1936, 37, 38.
Absolutely. And by the way, for this reason, it may well be that Putin does accept a ceasefire, chooses to take whatever time that ceasefire lasts, whether it's 6 months or 26 months, uses that time to build up resources, to shore up his own defense, perhaps strengthen certain alliances, stockpile, right? The Russians have not been able to keep up with the stockpile you would want to have if you were going to try to overrun all of Ukraine. It's pretty much what comes in from North Korea goes out immediately. The shipments from Iran are so important tactically that they're just literally waiting on the battlefield for missile launchers, for example, from Iran. So the Russians are not in fighting shape the way that they wish that they were. And so you could easily imagine Putin deciding, yeah, we'll agree to a ceasefire because it's in our long-term interest in a war footing more than we're interested in peace.
Right. I could see that. Yeah. Okay. Now, while this is going on, we did have on December 28th, Zelensky visit Mar-a-Lago. There were direct discussions between the president and Zelensky. They held a press conference right afterwards. That's where the 90% there announcement was actually first announced. We now know that Putin had called Trump ahead of the Zelensky meeting, sort of give his 2 cents, like, okay, this is, and the feeling out of this, well, you tell me, first of all, in that press conference, a lot was made out of the facial reactions of Zelensky as President Trump was making certain proclamations and stuff. And now tell me about that, but also tell me about the context that between the 28th and today, hostilities have actually increased between Russia and Ukraine. We've had reports of potential drone attacks. Actually, Putin has claimed that the Ukraine, and this is Putin's claim, has not been verified by any U.S. intelligence agency, that his residence was attacked by Ukraine drones, meaning Putin's residence. We've seen an increase in fighting, an increase of missile strikes, so on and so forth. So put it all together for me, Mike, starting with that 28th, the meeting on the 28th.
The meeting on the 28th was interesting because it was preceded and not followed by the phone call with Vladimir Putin. It was also interesting because there were 2 different readouts of how long it lasted. Moscow said it was 75 minutes, and President Trump said it was a full hour longer than that. So one has to wonder, why. It seems like a trivial detail, but when details are that far apart and they're numeric details, right? It's not just how good was the chocolate, pretty good or really good, right?
Right. It's not an opinion difference.
It's just, how many minutes did the stupid meeting last? Like, somebody knows this with certainty.
Right.
That the idea of being able to get it wrong just makes it seem like someone is attaching some significance to this. Now, what might be of more significance is the fact that the meeting took place before the Trump-Zelensky meeting. Like, why is President Trump taking a last-minute meeting from Putin before going into negotiation with Zelensky?
Right.
It smacked of Trump and Putin being, I don't want to say on one side, but buddying up in anticipation of having to negotiate with Zelensky, right?
Right.
That's the way it came off.
Well, let's put it this way.
Nobody wants to see that.
Right. Let's put it this way. The president is already battling the perception that he's too cozy with Putin.
All the more reason not to take that phone call.
I was going to say, right? Like, whether he deserves it or not, that's the perception. A lot of people, even Trump allies, would say, well, he has a really good relationship with Putin. He's buddying up with Putin. Right. So to your point, why would he take that phone call? B, how could it be known that quickly that he took that phone call? I mean, was it leaked? Is this part of their negotiation plan? Like, is part of their plan to have Zelensky be like, hey, don't be so obstinate because look, I'm buddying up to Putin. I mean, it's hard for me to fathom why you would even make that public so quickly. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's a good point. I think that there's 2 or 3 motivations, and that may be the most important one, is that they're trying to bring pressure on Zelensky for the reasons that we discussed earlier. Cracking the Zelensky nut is going to be tough. Right. And Trump wants it done because he wants this brought to a resolution. And the other thing that we shouldn't completely overlook is that sometimes the president is tone deaf. If you and I have said 100 times, he doesn't get very good staff work. If there's no one telling him, look, the press and a lot of Americans, including a lot of people in our MAGA base, think that you look like you're buddies with Vladimir Putin, who is a world-class jerk, who has been playing us for months. We all know that. The president knows that. The president's not a fool.
Right.
And so taking this phone call before going into a meeting with Zelensky just reinforces all of that, right? So you gotta not do that. And I think that Trump just misplayed that. He's not a stupid guy. He probably wishes he had that one back, right? He probably wishes he could play that differently. But it did bring pressure on Zelensky and continues to do so. The other thing that has to be said is that the president does see certain matters in alignment with Vladimir Putin. That there is some truth to the idea that they see the world similarly.
Right.
One of the things you and I talked about recently was the national security strategy that got published by the White House a couple of weeks ago. And in it, the White House admonished the Europeans for not doing enough. The White House said, we're going to control the Western Hemisphere, right? The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, blah, 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 blah. And did not say much about Putin being a bad guy, Chinese communism being bad for the world. None of this moralistic stuff toward the East, just toward the Europeans, and we're going to control the Western Hemisphere. It did feel as though the administration is giving up on what we used to consider American exceptionalism. That our exceptionalism comes from the fact that we are a nation whose government is based on a constitution built on principle, built on restraint, limited government power, right? That the reason government exists is to protect everyone's liberty. And that made us very different from everybody else. That American exceptionalism is not about, oh, by the way, we have more guns than everybody else, and so we get to boss everyone around. That's not what American exceptionalism is. So when you say we're going to control the Western Hemisphere, and you don't say anything about how naughty the Russian government in Moscow is, and you don't say much about how naughty the
Chinese government,
the PRC government is in Beijing, it does suggest, they didn't say so explicitly, but it does suggest that this administration is willing to tolerate a tremendous amount of Russian influence in nations geographically contiguous to Russia itself, and the same for China in Asia.
It is
an issue.
I was going to say, do we think that the president just sees a world that's divided into thirds? 1/3 for China, 1/3 for Russia, 1/3 for the US. And I don't mean equally in terms of geography, but just he sees it as being, there's 3 power players. This is how we're carving up the world. I mean, something that flew economically under the radar is that for the first time ever, Saudi Arabia accepted yuan for oil deliveries. First time that's happened. It was not dollar denominated. This was about 2 weeks ago. Flew under the radar. I didn't hear the government, our government, have anything to say about that. You and I have long talked about what happens when the dollar isn't the reserve currency of the world anymore. How does that affect the American economy? We're starting to see it. When the yuan is used as the settlement currency, as they say,
it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal because once you've got major transactions going on, then you get all of the institutional apparatus that goes along with that.
Right.
That we have always believed we control. This is the source of financial sanctions that we put against other nations.
So when you see something like that, and you kind of see the president or the administration's willingness to not discuss Russian naughtiness, as you put it, to not discuss PRC naughtiness outside of the economic tariff thing, does it just seem to you like, and I'm oversimplifying it, so I apologize ahead of time, do you see it as President Trump and his administration just throwing their hands up and saying, the world's going to have 3 emperors, the American emperor, the Russian emperor, and the Chinese emperor, and we're just going to make nice with the Chinese and American emperors? It
absolutely feels like that. Time will tell. Time will tell whether that is an accurate perception. But it absolutely feels like that. From the libertarian point of view, we're willing to do almost anything to bring conflicts to a close. But I do believe that in the long run, to avoid future conflicts, you need to get rid of this concept of powerful nations bossing around less powerful nations in their neighborhood. That is antithetical to long-term peace.
Right.
Now there's the European style way of looking at the world is not the same as American exceptionalism, which is to say based on the morality of protecting liberty. And it's not based on having the power to dictate to lesser nations in your neighborhood how things are going to work, but is rather based on relationships and alliances and institutions and rules and order and agreements. And if you do this, we do that, right? That's how the Europeans see the world. There is something to be said for that, but it rings hollow if the Europeans aren't willing to put resources behind it. It rings hollow if you can't bring the Russians and the Chinese into it. And I do not believe that throwing your hands up, as you put it, is the right strategy. This is one of the reasons why it is so important for the United States government to build up all the soft power it can over decades and then not just flush it down the toilet.
Explain soft power to us.
The ability to influence people without a gun. Maybe it's backed up at the end of the day by a gun, right?
Okay.
But at first blush, you have to be able to moralize. You have to be able to explain to friends and allies, as well as adversaries, those who would challenge your authority. It's important that you be able to explain to folks all over the world what is in their interest and your willingness to go the extra mile,
right, to
make it in their interest. And this is a very difficult thing. This is a very, very difficult thing because on the one hand, you might say there's really no way to project power without military power. And on first blush, it would certainly appear to be so. But we know that through economic power, through the ability to impose sanctions, but also the ability to project free trade, the ability to engage in transactions that are mutually beneficial for everyone, the ability to coordinate on important issues that are important to everybody.
Right.
For folks on the left, that might be the environment. For folks in the middle, that might be nuclear proliferation. It might be for folks on the right, it might be trade, and there are a half a dozen other issues spread all over that everybody does care about.
Right.
The ability to influence, win friends and influence people without going to war over it is what soft power is all about. And no one has been better than the United States at building that up. What we need to do is just be careful not to accidentally waste it. And I fear that we're giving up a huge piece of it when we confuse what it is that we mean by American exceptionalism.
That's true. And let me ask you this. Do you feel we're doing a good job of that soft power?
No.
Because, right, we are engaging in a lot of gunboat diplomacy, right? We are engaging in a lot of what appears to be selective moral enforcement, right? Like we have no problem abandoning Ukraine while at the same time pursuing regime change in Venezuela. And we're very open.
That's a bad look.
Of course it is. And that's what I'm saying.
At the very least, it's awkward timing, right?
I mean, okay, I'm ceding the question for you, but yeah. So to your opinion, we're not doing a very good job of the soft power right now. And I think, to your point, are we risking a decade, 2 decades down the road of losing all that influence sans the gun? that you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think it is at risk, and for a variety of reasons. It's one thing to tell the Europeans they got to step up to the plate. I think the White House has done that correctly, and
Right.
good on them for getting the Europeans' attention. It's another thing to then turn around and lecture them on the liberal nature of their immigration policy, for example.
Right.
Because that suggests that the reason we want you to step up in terms of GDP expenditure on military is because we're selfish and we don't want to do it ourselves. Which may be true, but I wouldn't lead with that argument, right?
Right.
I would lead with, it's good for you. You're in this together with us because you all run liberal democracies just like we do. And so those of us who believe in peace, as you do, Mr. and Mrs. European, as you do, it's time to step up to the plate and become exceptional like America is. Rather than, this is our sphere of influence, you better get your act together in your sphere of influence. That does not sell well in the long run. So in this sense, we have tried to give President Trump a lot of credit for his hard work in bringing so many conflicts around the world to some sort of resolution. As all of our viewers and others around the world know, the president has exaggerated his role in bringing many of these conflicts to a resolution, whether in Africa or India, Pakistan, wherever you look, he has exaggerated it. And we give him a pass because we just love the fact that he's engaged.
Right. And it's fair enough to say, much like, I know that was going to be sort of like the final wrap-up question on the Ukraine-Russia issue, which is right now, I think not the important thing, but the most prominent thing to come out of this is you might get a ceasefire out of this, which has not happened yet. As we said, tensions have actually escalated.
Yep.
But if you're working towards a ceasefire, a lot of people, again, are pointing out that this might be a lot like the typical Trump peace negotiation, which is you get a temporary hostility, a temporary cessation of hostilities, but there's no permanent resolution. There's no resolution to build on.
Bingo.
So do you feel that this is more along that case, or do you feel there would be?
Yes, I worry about that very much. As a matter of fact, that's why I brought up the other cases,
Mm.
because I fear that the president is not playing the long game.
Okay.
That bringing these conflicts to a resolution means doing so in a fashion that not necessarily 100% precludes them coming back to haunt us, but certainly suggests that the groundwork has been laid in such a fashion that it's less likely that
Right.
these various nations go back to shooting at each other, right? That's the goal. Otherwise, what have you accomplished, right? What have you accomplished? And I do fear that Putin looks at Trump's exaggerations around the world, and he says, I want mine. I want my White House exaggeration of how great a ceasefire would be. I want a ceasefire that I can, maybe outlast the Trump administration. I build up, I get healthier, I get economically healthier and militaristically healthier, and I take the rest of Ukraine in 3 years or in 7 years. But eventually I get what I want. And it's because nothing will have been done to preclude Russia from doing so. And I think that that's the great race, is between Putin doing whatever he has to do to take over the rest of Ukraine and the Europeans developing the military capabilities required to stop him from doing so.
I agree. I think this is like when you have two kids who are in timeout. At the core issue, if they still hate each other after the timeout, they're going to be at each other's throats again, right? During the time, you could get them to sit in timeout for an hour. The question is, have you gotten them to shake hands at the end of the day?
It does remind, it's speaking of another analogy. I used to teach an economics class for MBA students. And the final exam question was always, when can you trust someone? Right? When can you trust your partner, your business partner, your alliance partner, your contract partner? And your choices are, when they say so, based on past behavior, when they sign a contract, and those are all wrong. You can only trust that someone's going to do what it is that they say or they have committed to doing when it's in their interest. When it's in their long-term interest, they will do it. And if it's not in their long-term interest, good luck.
And you circle us back around to every great libertarian economist ever. That's why free trade is the best, because it's always in the interest of both parties when they voluntarily engage in free trade. All right, Mike, this was a great discussion. I want to throw in a little bit of entertainment for our viewers here for the last 5-10 minutes or so. Why don't you give me a prediction for 2026, something that you see happening or perhaps happening and maybe its ramifications?
Well, a couple of things. Let's wrap up what we were just talking about. I think that we will have a ceasefire.
Okay.
I think that 26 will end on a ceasefire. I think that the ceasefire will do Trump's approval rating a lot of good. I'm going to go so far as to play that into my next prediction, which is I think the Republicans have a shot at holding the House.
Mm.
And the reason for that is two or three different reasons. One is the economy is not so bad. The inflation drives us crazy. If the administration, if the president learns how to talk about affordability as though he's not looking down his nose at the rest of us, right? If he learns that, even if he doesn't feel it, believe it, wash his clothes in it, if he can just learn, take a page out of the Mamdani playbook. If he can learn, if he can be taught how to campaign in this area, that would blunt the Democratic push on affordability. The other aspect of that is the Democrats don't have a lot of plan, right? Saying the world is expensive and affordability is a problem is not a plan. So that may not carry a lot of water. And then if you were to layer on top of that a ceasefire in Ukraine, extracting us from there, and if we don't make a complete fool of ourselves in Venezuela, I think the president could be in pretty good shape going into the midterms. I think we got a shot at holding the House. A lot of that is based on the Democratic Party not handling this well, but I do predict the Democratic Party will not handle this well. So I think the Republicans have a shot at holding the House. On the economic front, I think we're going to end up in a pretty good place. I predict that Kevin Hassert will be appointed the next Federal Reserve chairman. I think that that is a horrific mistake. I don't think that a White House should ever be appointing someone from among its own team to chair the Federal Reserve System. I think markets will tank based on that announcement. But the good news is Kevin's a smart guy. He understands this. The chair is very powerful, but he only has one vote in the Federal Open Market Committee. So it's completely possible that Fed policy stays in check. I do wish that short of getting rid of the Fed altogether, which is what I would put us on a path to doing over a few-year period, I wish at the very least we would replace the FOMC with policy made by a computer. But we're not going to get that. And I think that Kevin's going to hang in there. Markets will rebound by the end of the year when they learn that he's not just a Trump lackey. He's not just going to lower interest rates because the White House wants him to. Markets will come back and the Republicans will hold the House.
That is quite the bold prediction. I still, though, I will harp on what you haven't mentioned, which is the trustworthiness of the Trump administration and whether they can win that back with their own base. Right now, it's pretty dodgy.
Yeah.
We still have not had the full compliance with the Transparency Act around
the Epstein files.
The Epstein files.
That's a big problem.
That's a huge problem. They are also battling historical results in 2026. If they lose the House, which right now it looks like they will, I mean,
Yep.
Your prediction aside, it looks like they may lose the House.
Yep.
If they lose the House, for sure, nothing gets done. It'll be nothing but lawfare against the president and his administration. In fairness, it's a never-ending cycle of retaliation. You will have Democrats retaliating for what he's done with Comey, what he's done with Letitia James, what he's trying to do with Jack Smith. And let's face it, the admissions of someone like a Dan Bongino who's saying, look, before I got in, I lied a lot. And I was paid to lie a lot for my opinions. And
not the exact word he used, but that was certainly the impression he left us with. Yes.
Right. That was he was paid for his opinions, which are not what he's paid to do as the deputy attorney, FBI director. And I think a lot of that will still come down to trust. I hope you're right about the economy. I don't know. If the president doubles down on his dopey tariffs, if he doubles down on his insistence on bullying people around the world, companies and things of that nature, the economy, Mike, as much as I respect you, could just as easily make that left turn. You and I both know that.
Oh, absolutely it could.
And if it does, I think I view this as a snowball at the top of the hill, right?
Yeah.
All it takes is that little bit of a push. And I think if things start rolling against the president by the time the House elections come around in November,
you will not want to be in front of that snowball.
I think it'll be an avalanche. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's completely possible. And to your other point, a la our discussion of a week or two ago,
yeah,
it's not always about the economy per se, but whether people trust that you care about what they care about, and that's usually the economy. So one could easily imagine if Trump doesn't, as I suggested he needs to, if he doesn't learn how to talk about affordability in a way that's credible, that makes people feel like he understands their pain, right? Then even if the economy doesn't take a bad left turn, just continues to generate more and more inflation, and he acts like he doesn't care, and the Epstein files never get resolved, released, people still believe that the White House is being cagey about this, I see where you're coming from. It could be a very bleak November for Republicans.
It might indeed. All right, everyone. You've been watching Liberty Lens. Listen, what do you think of our predictions? Leave a comment below there in the if you're on YouTube or X, leave us a comment. We'll take a look at it. It's been Mr. Mike Maat and Big John here with you. Happy New Year. Enjoy a happy and healthy 2026 from us to you. Join us next week for another episode of Liberty Lens. Until then, peace, everyone.